Hello, Nitish, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So, like quickly, I will just you can see my screen also, right?
Yes,
Okay. So, guys, I will quickly move through the screen once again. So, and Nitish, have you started the recording also, right?
yes.
Okay. So, guys, welcome to Surat MuleSoft Meetup 47, and the topic for today's meetup is error handling with a MuleSoft. And Nikhil will be the speaker for today's session. Just let me go through some safe harbor statement. So, both speaker and all this meetup in the individual capacity only, and we are not representing our organization here. The presentation is strictly for the learning purpose. An organizer or presenter doesn't hold the responsibility whether the same solution will work for your business requirements. Presentation is not meant for any promotional activities. The recording of this meetup will be uploaded to the event page within 24 hours. You can submit, you can ask question at any time. You can use as we enable the presenter mode for everyone. And at the end, like, it's very important for us to to get the feedback from you. You can provide the feedback for the speaker and the organizer, and it's very so just organizer for this meetup is like myself, Jitendra and Nitish. We both are leading this Surat MuleSoft meetup group, and we will just skip our introduction we have done many times. So yeah, so I will just hand over this session to Nikhil. So Nikhil, can you just share your screen and just start the session from here? I will just
Yeah,
unshare.
sure. Yeah. Let me know once you're able to see the screen. Okay. Starting with my introduction, I've been into MuleSoft since 3 years, and it's been like I've attended various meetups, been speaker. I'm also Kolhapur meetup leader and certified MuleSoft developer and an integration architect. So let's start with our topic today. I will go through the contents that we are going to go through today. So we'll basically go through how do we do error or exception handling in Mule 4. So we'll go through the contents like error types. What are the basic error types? Error components that we can use, try-catch scope error handling in private or versus subflow, raising custom errors, error handling in sub-processing like parallel for each, multi-processing, batch processing, scatter gather, error handling in DataWeave. We'll go through one topic, one by one, all the topics. So basically starting with the categories of errors. There are two categories of errors basically if we go into MuleSoft. There are system errors and messaging error. We'll focus more on the demo. That's what I want to do. So I will first show like how does the error object gets created in MuleSoft. Okay. So for starting with this this is my basic flow. I have a listener. I'm just setting it as an input payload. I'm just printing out the payload as the success started flow. This is my REST API call. I'm calling a REST API. You can see a demo REST API, which will generate the error for me to just show how the error handling is done. And this is my payload at the end. So put this into debug mode. Let's see how it goes. Okay. Okay. So this is my basic flow. I have an error. Error is generated on this API. So basically how an error object is created in MuleSoft. If you see, this is my error object. So these are the attributes that an error object has: description, detailed description, error types. These are the types of references that you have in error object. You can generate your own error message, that you will also see how you can generate your own message. This is basically how error object gets created when an error is thrown in MuleSoft. Basically, you can see error object is getting created and then it goes out. I'll print out the error object so we get a reference on that. There are two types of block basically that I will see, but I will just print out the error object for a reference. Yeah. I'll print out the error object. Okay, that's deployed. See how it goes. I have error handling at a flow level. Error is created. It goes into my error handling block. basically we have the error object. So here you see how the error object basically look like, how it is divided. So this is the error type. Under that you can see what is the error type, error message. Basically it has different components. Then you can go through these. You can also see the status code 404 here. The main things that we generally use, error description, detailed description. So this is how a error object is basically created, how it looks like, how is the structure of that. You'll see more in that. First of all, I will have to see one thing I wanted to show. So here I've already done is when you go into listener. So listener is the source from where the error is propagated. Okay. And when it comes out, if you go to this responses section, what I have set here, response, it's 200. When it is 200, okay, success, you always have a payload. And but when there is an error response, by default it doesn't have a payload, it has an error dot description, and here it is empty. So I have set this to payload, and here I am printing error dot error message attribute status code. Basically I'm printing this. Okay. Let me show you what by default we have in a listener. We have to set this according to a, okay. When you have a default listener, what do we have here? It has error dot description, and the default status code always what we get is 500. So if you want to make it customized, you can set it to this to payload, and you can set the status code whatever you're getting, or else default Mule will handle it and it will always give you a 500 server error. Okay. This is about error object that I wanted to show. Let's go to other sides. We have seen, understand how the error object in Mule 4 is. So we have seen how the error object basically looks like, what other components are there in error objects that we have seen. Description basically gives the description of the problem. Detailed description. Type, you can see error dot type HTTP. I want to see here. Error dot type is here is not found. Error description, detailed description. This is how basically error object, key value pass for error object, cause, message. So there are multiple things, but it depends what you want to throw out or what you want to exercise in your error object to the end user. You can print out those values. Okay. So how the errors are generally categorized, it can be of two types. Any is the parent level error handler that we will see, and the other are the critical one. In the any, you can basically transformation, routing errors, connectivity errors if you're using any connectors like database, anything. Expression, basically when you are using transform messages. Security errors, basically when you are trying to access any protocol, if you have applied API policies or something. So under that, there are different categories. So let us see how this basically is deformated. We'll also go through this slide. Basically, yeah, I want to show this core. What are the error handlers? On error continue, on error propagate, error handler. We'll go through this error handler. How does a global error handler works? Basically, if you don't want to have a flow level error handler, okay, you want a global error handler in your project. You don't want to handle errors at every flow. So what we basically do, or good approach is, you have a global error handler. Okay, let me share this. I have a global error level error handler where I can handle all my errors. You have a meaningful message like this. Okay, I'm just doing error type, error namespace. This is my global error handler. If there is any error in any flow, if you're not handling at the flow level, it will go to a global level error handler. So this is how the prescript, if you see how it goes. If you don't have a flow level, component level always have a greater precedence, then flow level, then global, and then default. This is how the precedence basically looks like. So let us go through how does the global level error handler. So this is my, I don't have a flow level, I will remove. Okay, I won't have a flow level error handler here. See how does global error handler works. For global level error handler, you have to add one configuration always where you give it. I will give this to my global level error handler. In global level error handler, it depends on the namespace. Suppose if my error is HTTP not found, okay, the first one it matches, it will go into on error propagate. If I don't have HTTP not found, then by default the parent level error handler, as we seen in the diagram, is always any. If you see here, the parent level error handler is any. Let's see. Okay. Set it, I don't have a flow level error handler. Error is generated. You see, it's gone to my global error handler. How did it match? Error type was HTTP not found. And here also what I have set is HTTP not found. It matches here. It goes to this error message, and then you get the meaningful message that I have displayed, timestamp, everything. Okay. So if I don't have HTTP not found, by default it will go to any. Or if doesn't matches the error type, the most parent type will be any. This is how it goes for a global level error handler, which is for the whole of my API. I don't have to do it at a flow level. Okay, what are the next thing? So we have two components. Let's see, on error continue versus on error propagate. I have a good slide where we can present this here. So suppose this is my event processor. I will say this is my listener. These are my components. Basically, you can say transform message, database, anything. And this is my response, which is always returned by listener. As we saw, there are the response section in the listener, which I showed you previously, okay, which prints our responses. Okay, this. So this is my on error propagate scenario, where what happens if the event processor, it has an error. Okay, the error is propagated, error goes back to the response and goes as a 500. Okay, so you can also print out whatever is the status code there, but goes as a 500 back to my listener. And what happens in on error continue? So you see this green line is 200. Okay, so even if there is an error, one second, even if there is an error, it is propagated as a 200. Okay, back to my listener. So let's see how this goes. You already seen how on error propagate works. So under continue, we'll add a simple logger. Okay, error is generated, goes to my error handler. Now I have it at flow level. So flow level will get the precedence. And if you see here, what is my status code? It's 200. Okay. What I got, success started flow, never went to the last component. It prints this payload. You got the error here, flow got halted here. And it was back there. Sorry. Let's check how it works for on error propagate. So this should be replaced with whatever is the status code. It won't give us 200. Okay. What is the error status code? That will be get printed. Okay. So on I propagate, you see 404. What is the error status code? Success started flow. And this is what the difference is between on error propagate, on error continue. So when basically we use on error continue, so there are multiple scenarios. Suppose I want to process multiple records, suppose in for each or somewhere. So one of my records, if it is having an error, it should not halt other records execution. So that's where the stage where we can use on error continue. So where we want to process other records, even if one record is failing, that's the scenario where we use on error continue. Or if there is a critical records, like if you don't want to process with other records once a record is failed, or there is a dependency on the other records, so you can use on error propagate. Here you can halt your flow whenever there is an error, you don't want to proceed or you don't want to execute the other flows. In that scenario, you can use on error propagate. Okay, the slide we have seen. This is how the global level error handler that we have done. This is the global configuration that we have to do, and depending upon the error type, whichever matches, it goes into that block, into the global level error handler. Okay, let's see custom level error handling. Okay, let me walk you through the flow first of all. The basic flow, I have an input payload where I'm taking a raise error. Okay, I'm just taking employee ID, employee name as an input payload, starting the flow. So suppose there is a condition where you want to raise the error, some validations that you have put. Suppose this is my validation, like employee name, I don't want to keep it as empty. This is my validation. If user is putting employee name as empty, you want to raise the error. You don't want to allow the user to put the employee name as empty. So in these scenarios, so these are the validation scenarios that you need to handle on your end. So this is basically a custom error that you have to create. So this is basically when you comes into raise error type. Okay, so what I'm going into this flow, I'm setting the HTTP status code bad request, something like 400 bad request, user input is wrong. I'm setting the HTTP status as 400. And when raise error, how do you define this? So this is basically a namespace and this is identifier. Basically how we do like HTTP not found. So basically HTTP is the namespace there and not found is the identifier. So that way we have to define our own error type. And this is the description I'm giving. Invalid data, employee name cannot be empty. And if it is not empty, I'm just having the alternate route here, finish flow. So let's put this into a breakpoint and let's see how this works. So now here I don't have a flow level error handler if you see here, okay. So let's see how this is going to work, because we have the precedence set, right? If you don't have a flow level error handler, the next part it will search for is global level. If I don't have global, then it will be a default level, okay. Custom level error handler. I don't have a flow level. Okay, error is generated. Invalid data, employee name cannot be empty. Error object is created. If you see description, detailed description, error type, everything is created. Now, if you see now, it goes into global because I didn't have the flow level. So next precedence it gave to global level error handler. So under global also, if you see, it didn't have any match because the error type here is employee invalid record. There was no match. This is for HTTP not found. So it goes into the parent level, that is any, and this will be the error message that it will print. So this is how it will get print. This is basically how you can raise errors for your own validations or something that you have. You can raise errors. Okay, Jackie, if we have any questions until now.
Not in the chat box. If anybody have any question, feel free.
Okay, let's go to the next section. So I'll go through the component level error handling. So next sequence, that is component level, will get the precedence. Okay, let's go through the try scope error handling. So walk you through the basic flow that I have. Suppose there are scenarios where you don't want to handle errors at the flow level or at the global level. You want to handle it basically at the component level. Suppose that I have a database connector, and if there some of the records are failing, I want to do some processing, like I want to put them into an object store or something. So in that scenario, you can't put the whole object somewhere, or you can just pass it out. So in that case, what you can do is you can put the database connector into a try catch block and do the error handling here itself. Like whatever you want to do, when the error is created, that object you can put into as a mail, or you can store it into object store, whatever processing you want to do when an error is thrown out by that connector. That basically tells how you can do it at a component level. So let's see how this works. I'm passing this as an input. Okay. What is my validation basically here is it should be a number, employee ID. Here I'm creating error. I will pass it as a float value. Okay. So this should create an error because it is not a number, it's a float value, it's not an integer. Error is created. If you see the precedence, it goes at the component level. Even if I had a global level error handling, so the precedence is for component here before going to global. Goes to component. Now, if you see now, once the component is resolved, I don't have a flow. Now it went to global. And this will match because any error type is just an invalid number. So it matches to any, and you will get the message from here. Okay, this is how the basically you can say how precedence takes help in the try-catch scope. I have on error propagate here. What you got is 500. If I put on error continue, basically you will get 200. And the same, whatever you want to do a processing as it, you can do it here in the error block. Okay. Yeah, I have this example for you. How it happens on error continue. Try catch. This creates an error, goes into the error block. Okay. Once the error block is created, this won't be executed. Okay. Because this parallel, it's not the parallel. Whatever it will be go on error continue, will throw the control out and this will get executed. Let me show you that also. In case of on error propagate, it didn't propagate to this. Basically, when you get the error, it comes out and goes to the error handler and then to the global level error handler. So let's see how it works if you have an on error continue here. So suppose if there are a scenario, if even if there is an error in a on error in your try block. Okay, suppose your database connector is giving some error, but you want to proceed with the rest of the components in the flow. Suppose the database connector gave me an error. After that, I have some mail or some notifications to be sent, so I want to proceed. I don't want my stop flow to stop there. So in that case, you can use a on error continue here. So what happens, even if there is an error thrown in the try catch block, it will execute the successive components here. Let me show you that how the control goes there. Okay, the error is there in the try block, goes to on error continue, throws 200, and the successive components after my try catch block, the control goes out and you get 200 response. Okay, finished flow. This is how you can execute if you want to execute other components even if there is an error. Totally depends on how your execution is, how you want to execute. Depending on that, you can use on error propagate, on error continue blocks. Okay.
Nikhil, there is a one question.
Yeah.
Can we extract any data like employee ID from the payload in the raise error?
It has to be in your payload. Like, okay, suppose my payload remains employee ID only, right? So if you want to print, you can do just plus plus of payload dot employee ID. It will append it to your error message. Whatever is my error message here. Okay, there is custom error. So whenever this is my description, right? Whatever you can do is you can just add it, or you can put add it here like fx into payload dot employee ID. Let me show you. This is also not right. Raise error. So then we'll have to set it as a payload. We'll have to use a transform message. We cannot do it as it here. We can do it as a transform message, set it there, and then we'll have to print it out. We cannot do it here basically, what he was trying to say. We'll have to add a transform message here and then basically append it to the error message, and then that we can print it out. Basically that way we can do. Okay. Go to on error propagate, how it was inside try catch block. So suppose the error is generated in my try catch block. I have a on error propagate. It will basically stop the flow. The successive components won't be ever be executed. The flow will go back to my HTTP response that we have already seen this example here. So this is the main component where we come like child level and parent level error handling. Okay, I have the example here. Let me walk you through the flow. So this is my parent flow. You can say this is my main flow. This is my child flow. So what I have for you here is I've executed this scenario. Let me show you which scenario I'm doing. I'm doing this third scenario for now. On error continue I have on both the sides. Okay. So let's see, let's put a breakpoint. There are three different scenarios when comes into parent and child level. So suppose if I have a on error continue, sorry, I have a on error continue in my child flow. Suppose there is an instance where if I have a parent flow and a child flow, suppose if I give you an example, in my parent flow, I'm doing something like inserting records into my database. And in my child flow, I want to do some processing, or you can say I'm just sending out a email notification of the same records. This is I'm doing into my child flow. So there are some scenarios if I don't want to stop the halt of my parent flow once if there is an error in the child flow. So how we can do that? Suppose this is the first scenario. Okay, in the child flow I have a on error continue message. How the flow reference goes? Suppose this is my flow reference. Flow reference goes here. Sorry, flow reference goes to my child flow. There is an error created. Is number creates an error. On error continue basically gives you a 200. It goes back here and it will go through this. The successive components will be executed because it was thrown as 200. Okay. Okay. In this scenario, let us demo this. Okay. I have a on error continue here. I won't have an error handler here. Okay. I will delete this. This is my input. I have the employee ID, employee name, two values, deployed. Okay. Started flow into my parent flow, go into my child flow creates an error. Okay, employee ID type mismatch. I have error handling here. On error continue, which will throw me 200 okay to my parent flow, and the successive component will get executed. In this case the control goes to my next flow and it will be 200 okay. What you get as a response is 200 okay. As it went to this, it printed out this finished main flow. So what happens in this case if I have a on error propagate here? The successive components will not get executed. It will give me a 500 error. Let's see. Flow creates an error. On error propagate will throw out an error to my main flow. It won't go here. It will directly go to my listener, basically what you say as the source, and prints out my error. So this is how we've seen two scenarios: when it has on error continue, when it has on error propagate. So let's say a scenario where I have also have a flow level error handler on my parent level. I didn't have anything on my parent level as of now. So I will add on error. The instance, I will add on error continue here. Okay. Add a payload. Just copy the message from here. Error in parent flow, basically. Okay. I wanna continue. I don't propagate here. I will also add, yeah. This is the scenario we wanted to see. It's deployed. Check. Error is generated, goes into my child level error handler, throws out 500 server error. Now what happens? Now I also have a flow level error handler here. Okay. It will go here, set the payload, comes out. See, if you see, even if it gives on a continue, it didn't go to the successive components. So it has to be a 200 okay from the child flow, then only it will go back to my successive components. Okay. If see error in parent flow, the other components after the flow reference weren't executed. So these are the types that you need to see when you're basically handling a child and parent level error handling. Three types that we have seen. Let's go for parallel processing. Basically, I have a for each to demo. Okay. I have a flow. Let me go through the flow. Basically, what for each did. For each, if you have an array of records, basically for now we have seen a single record. For now, for each, we'll have an array of records. I have two records here. Okay. Processes one record at a time. Basically, that's what how it does for each. And what I'm doing here is I'm just putting it here. I'm doing a validation here that the employee name should not be empty. Okay. I've done a validation here. It's inside the try catch block. I have wrapped it. So we always seen how try catch block works. So I have on error propagate. I'm just logging the record, whatever it is. Basically this object whole as it is, I'm logging it. And then I have a payload. So how it works for on error propagate, on error continue. Go through this for each flow. If you see, this is my for each, this is my parallel for each error handling. Okay, so for if you see the error handling, there are two types. For try catch, I have a successive components which will be throwing an error. I have an or error continue block. Let's see the demo how it works. Deployed. Okay. Okay, I have a breakpoint. Yeah. So the error is generated for the first record. If you see, it's showing employee name cannot be empty. So it will go into the error handler on error propagate 500, log the record, the first record that I had sent. I'm going back again, goes here because I have a global level error handler. I will have to get through it first. Probably be able to demo better. I don't have any global level, so the precedence won't be there. Everything will be handled at my for each level. Okay, it comes here. First error is created, logs it out. Second error is created. If you see, there are two records. Employee name cannot be empty. Employee name cannot be empty. Okay, that both of the records had error. It went through because I had on error propagate. It came out, and what you get as a response is 500 server error, and we basically got the payload, which is the record that we had. It's better we don't print payload. I would transform there. So let's see how it works if I have a on error continue. So what happened here is the execution of one record. Suppose the first record failed, right? The second record did not process. So this is the halt. If I have 100 records, right? Any one of the records fail, my 99 records won't be processed if I have an on error propagate block here, because it will always halt my process. So in these scenarios, it's always a better case. You go for on error, continue. Even if there is an error, you don't want to stop the execution of other records, right? If you're inserting into database, there are hundreds of records and one database record is not getting inserted. You don't want to stop your flow. You basically want to continue with it, right? You want to insert the other records also there. So this is the scenario where you can use wrap that database block basically using on error continue. So let's see. I have an error here. Okay. Prints it out. The first record goes back again. Second record came. It's also an error. Prints it out. You see, my both records are printed. In the first scenario, it just prints out the first record because it gives an error, it comes out. In this scenario, it will process all your records. Okay. And it gives 200 okay, comes out and basically gives you the payload, whatever it is, success, finish flow. So it's the case where if you basically want to process, don't want to halt the execution of, or you can say error of one record shouldn't halt the execution of my other records. It's a classic case where we can use on error continue. What is the use of on error continue? So we'll go into parallel for each. Basically, you can say multi-threading concepts come here. Okay. Even if you have on air propagate on air continue, it won't affect because each thread is differently propagating. Let's see. It's not the case like for each one record halts the execution of other, but it won't happen because parallel for each, every thread is different. Every record is having a different thread. Let's see for parallel for each. Have this one. Have the same record. Okay. This, even if the first employee name is empty, I'm hoping that the second record should be processed, even if I'm using on error propagate here, right? Because there's no dependency on the first record. Just clear the metadata. Okay, comes here. First record, second record got loaded. There is error. Okay, comes log. If you see, both the records are log, even if there is no not, because every record is carried on a different thread, so it doesn't depend, like even if execution of one record is halted, all other records will be processed, because this is a parallel execution, not a synchronous type of execution that we have. So in this scenario, on error propagate, on error continue, even if you use all the records will be processed, it will be the same case, but it will be just a scenario where the other components after my parallel for each will also be executed. In this case, it won't be executed. Okay, here we are. Now the basic error handling for scatter gather. Scatter gather, let me first show you a simple thing. How does a scatter gather look, or how does it work? Okay, this is my scatter gather where you want to do multiple processing. Suppose this is my example where I want to validate both my records at once. Suppose I have an employee ID and I have an employee name. So I am validating employee name on this route. I'm validating employee ID on this route. I don't want a synchronous execution like one after another. Basically, I want to increase the execution speed. I'm doing a parallel processing using a scatter gather here. So this is my scatter gather, checking these components, and let's see how the error object gets created here. What I'm doing basically here is I'm printing out the error message dot payload here. So you will see how the error object basically gets created in scatter gather. Okay. Scatter gather is best suited for multicast scenarios that we seen. If you want to process, there are multiple routes. If you want to process multiple things at once time, processed in parallel with aggregate responses. So whatever happens, it gives you response at once. At the end, it's aggregate all the responses from all the routes, and you will get it as one. More than one process is required to function. That's right. So scatter gather has many features to control the execution flows. Let's see basically. add a breakpoint here and show how in scatter gather you can see.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, Jackie.
Hello. Hi Nitish, Nikhil is joining back. Okay, he lose
Sure.
some connection. So
Sure.
let's
Sure.
he's joining.
Sure. 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 Yes, Nikhil.
Yeah, Nikhil.
Okay, sorry. Issue. No, is my screen visible? Okay. Showing scatter gather. Okay, let's see. This basically looks send the request. It's good, right? Is there any delay or is
No,
okay? Actually, I'm connected with mobile internet, so just wanted to confirm. So there is error if you see on one there is error is coming out and all of my scatter gather throws error. So what type of error basically we get here? Let me show you that also. If you see here, the error basically here, even if there was an invalid number or invalid anything, it basically gives a mule composite error always because it once the words are combined here and it always throws the mule composite error routing. So I have a error handler at my flow level, basically goes there and I'm printing. So what I'm printing here, if you see basically, I'm printing error message dot payload. So this is a good example where you can see how the errors are seen in scatter gather. I had two records, two processes basically, parallel processes running. So it was a failure. So first one was the blank string. Okay. Second one was also a failure. The failures, if you see here, it goes there two blocks basically I have here. I have a failure block under which my records will go, and this next block that I have here is results block. Records are there, this will go into this. Let me show you that also. If I have a whole number here, this block. Okay, let's see. I will execute. Let's see how it goes. Okay, under failure, I have the first process, employee name cannot be empty. And if you see the results now, under results, I have my success, means it was basically the number. So this is how, if you want to just see different process, different routes in your scatter gather, how much failures were there, what success. So you can basically go through these objects. You have one failure and other one is the result. How the records are propagated here. I wanted to show this is how it works for scatter gather.
Let's ask one question on scatter gather to people, like, no. So basically, let's consider, like, in scatter gather, if we have a two routes and one of the route got failed, and we got a response for one of the route. So what will be the output basically? So let's consider I have a two route, and like, route one was successful and route two was failure. So what will be the response basically?
Mule composite error.
Right. So but now my now the second question, like, you are right, it will throw some composite routing kind of error, right, Nikhil? So that
Yeah.
will be the error thrown.
Yeah.
But I want to print the output from the first route which was the successful, right? At least let's consider if I have a 3 4 routes in my scatter gather. So whatever route was successful, and I want to aggregate a successful response from all the routes, and I have to just send it to, my STTP response base as a STTP response. But for failure, I just want to avoid that. Is there any way we can do it in the scatter gather?
We can use DataWeave for that.
Not data way. I can give some hint. We can use the error handling somewhere, like how, if we want to use the error handling, how we can use that error handling,
We can keep flows in try catch,
right?
and then try catch we can define the error handling.
Okay, so let me give a solution. So basically, like, for each route, you can define each route under the try catch block, right? And in each try catch block, you can just put on error continue. Within or error continue, you can set the payload as a empty, like, payload as a empty basically. So basically, I have a 4 routes. So for 4 routes, I will just define the 4 try and catch for each and every route, and there will be on error continue for all the routes. Within that all the routes, I will define as a empty array, basically empty array payload. So in that case, what will happen, even the error will be generated, right? So like, it will try to aggregate with, with all the successful route, but it will try to aggregate the empty response, right? So what, because we are defining the empty response in the transformation. So that is how you can achieve, like, you can just achieve, you can aggregate the response from the successful routes, and you can just ignore the, like, error response route.
Yeah, right. We have the same scenario. I have the same scenario where I have the two routes here. Let me put that. One more case, like even if there is an error or one of the route, it won't halt the process of scatter gather always. Okay, it will give you a composite routing error, but other process on the way, it will also be getting executed even if the success or failure. So if I go through the case one of scatter gather, where we saw basically I printed the error message payload, where we had the results, in that we had the success scenarios, and under the failure we had the failure scenarios. So this is what I think Jackie was talking about. If there are two routes, basically you can have a on error continue here. Let's demo this. Okay, if there are two routes, right, there's a blank string validation and there is a is number validation. Even if there is a error, I don't want to give a composite routing error. So what you can do, you have had add error continue in both the, wrap those in try catch blocks, add on error continue, basically throwing out 200. Okay, and then you can execute the successive components. Let's see how this works. This one of the approach. I will have error in one of my root, like employee name I'm passing as empty. Just to basically demo this. Okay. Go inside the scatter gather. This is good. Okay. This is good. This creates an error because I passed it as empty. I have one error, continue here. Okay. 200. Okay. It doesn't give me a composite routing error. And the successive components after the basically scatter gather will be executed, which won't be get executed if you don't use a on error continue at the component level. The other components won't be getting executed. So what you get as a response, you get 200. Okay. And you get basically what happened with the zero root or what happened with the first root. So this is how basically we have seen about scatter gather, parallel processing.
One more question, like so
Yeah.
currently, like whatever scatter gather shown by Nikhil, it runs in the parallel, right? Is
Yeah.
there any way can I run the scatter gather in the sequential manner, basically? Does anybody aware of that particular thing? So basically, I want to run in the sequential, like first route, second route, third route, like that. Is there any way I can do that? So generally, you may arise across the case whenever you are running a transactions, basically, right? You may have to run the scatter gather in the sequential manner. Is there any way I can run it in the sequential manner?
Can use a for loop for each loop instead of scatter
Okay.
gather.
So Nikhil, can you go to scatter gather component?
Yeah.
You can set the max current currency equals to 1. So in this case, it will run one by one.
Okay.
Yeah, you can.
That was a good point. Okay. Okay, error handling when you have multiple process. So we seen for each how it works if you have processing one record after another. So this is about batch. This is basically how it works for parallel processing. When you go to a batch, if this is a good point, like if any error is occurred inside batch, it will never propagate to your main flow error. Okay, so let me show you. Okay, so if this is my batch, okay, if any error is created inside this batch, it won't ever go to my flow level error handler, even if I have anything. It's depending, it's just has to be handled on the batch level. It will go into on complete phase and you get the logger. So there will be nothing executed at the flow level. Only the other components like listener, if I have anything outside the batch, that will be beneficial if I have the flow level error handler. Batch level error handling can't be done at flow level. That's what I wanted to just show. So here I will show you an example. So what is this? This is my flow basically. So if I show my request, okay, this is my batch. I'm passing multiple records here if you see. So this is my validation. Okay, payload.employee name. If it is empty or not, I will validate. So what I'm doing here is I'm having one batch step where I've put the accept policy as only failures. So this is the process. If there are any error records, okay, this will go to my batch step 2 and I will catch here only failure records. Okay, suppose if I have an example, like if I am my batch step 1, I'm doing an insertion into database and whatever records are failing I want to put into Excel sheet or something, right? So whatever records are failing into my batch step 1, what I can do, I process it here in my batch step 2. So this is how you can do error handling here in the batch processing. And what you have to do here basically at the batch level, right? You have to set the max number of failed records. If you set it to 0, this value basically, if you set to 0, it will stop the processing when a single failed record is found. If suppose there are 100 records and one record is failing, my whole batch process will stop. There's no way of doing that, like is not a good way. So if I set the max failed number records of 1, it will continue processing indefinitely regardless of the number of failed records. So even if my first record fails, the processing will get executed. I will go into my batch step 2. It will happen like that. Okay, and max number of failed records you can set to any integer until max number of failed records are reached. So suppose I have hundreds of records. Okay, I have a batch of 100 records. I've set my max failed records to 100. or you can set it to 1, or you can set to any integer. But if you set to 0, whenever there is a single failed record, it will halt the execution. Okay, let's see. Okay, put into debug. Okay, error is created. There are 2 error records basically. Okay, so both the records, what I'm doing is I'm just logging it out. You can do any processing in your batch step 2. This is my first failed record. This is my second failed record. Okay, these are my 2 failed records that were getting executed. So if you see here, even if there is an error, it doesn't go to a flow level. It will just go to on complete and will just log out whatever is there, like how many results were loaded, what was the count. If you see here, here also you can see how many records were there. It has 2 records. So if you want to handle your failure records, this is one good thing you can do. You can have one batch step which will just handle all your failure records. Okay, and on my batch step 1, I'm setting the accept policy to all. So all the records processing will be done here. Any records which are failing into batch step 1, I will handle them into my batch step 2. Whatever process you want to do with that, you can do it. This is one way how you can handle failure records in batch. Okay, there are 2 ways. Add a batch step with accept policy to know all the records which are faced, and the other way is basically add a try catch activity in the batch steps. So this we have seen, okay, where I set my one batch step to accept failures and I will process all the failed records in that. And the other case is where, okay, second approach is basically I will enclose that inside a try catch block, set it to on error continue, like whatever, if the record is failed, I can do a processing in this, my error handling block. Suppose if database insertion is failed and I want to put that failed record into Excel file, I can do it inside my on error continue, the processing, whatever I want to do. Okay, let me show you this also then. Add a breakpoint here. Yeah. I've set it to on error. Record fails, it should continue with the other records that we have seen in other. Key record is failing, on error continue. I'm just logging it out. Whatever processing you want to do, you can do it there. On error continue goes into my on complete phase and it is out. So basically you get 200. How many number of records, loaded records and success records and processed records, you will get it into that. So this is how we do into batch process. Ways how you can handle error, whatever I've seen. One is using only failure batch step, and other is you can use a try catch block, wrap it into on error continue you can use. And the last topic is like you can also create error handling in DataWeave. So there are multiple functions, fail, fail if, try, or else try. You can see the syntaxes, but I will demo one of them for you. Like I will demo the fail function, how it works basically. So handling it at a data view level is basically like a validation type, like how we do it in raise error. Like if there is some data view error, if the employee name is, suppose what I'm doing here is employee name is empty. I don't want to process my execution to other flow because there's a validation error, like you can say a bad request. I want to throw it out. So what I will do is I'm using the fail function, the data view function, employee name cannot be empty. And this will just raise the error out and it will throw it out as a response to the payload. Okay, let's see how this works. The multiple functions, you can go through the syntax. I'm using the fail function. I just want to hold the execution of my flow. Basically a validation I'm doing, like I did it in raise error. Okay, data view level error handling. So employee name, I'm passing it as empty. Okay, should create an error here in my transform message, basically generates an error. I have it there. Okay, what does it show? Employee name cannot be empty. Basically, if you want to raise your error, and then you can also handle these error, put something on error, propagate or continue here at the flow level, and then put whatever message you want to basically print it out. You can do that also like we did in the other flows. So precedence, one things all should always be taken into consideration. If you're having a flow level error handler, it will always take precedence over global. If you have a global default, if there is nothing, it will go to the default level error handler. So this is the precedence level, and I think this is pretty much what I had. Yeah, Jackie, if there's any questions or if someone wants to share anything that
Yeah.
I might have missed out.
So guys, anybody have any question? Any question or anything? Thanks, Nikhil, for the great session. I think you have covered most of the scenarios related to error handling. Thank you so much for taking the time in the Surat MuleSoft Meetup, and looking
That's-
forward for the more session from you.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
so guys, anybody have any other question? Okay. So Nitish, now your role started. You can just start count
Yeah,
quiz.
sure, Jackie.
Like Nikhil, can you please unshare your screen so
Yeah,
uh,
I'll stop sharing.